Good morning, everybody. Today, we're going to pick up with really how the roaring 20s comes to an end, and that is with the fall of the stock market. Now, before we get to that, Herbert Hoover had recently been elected president and sworn in on March 4th, 1929. So, when he took over, there were a few dark clouds on the economic horizon. But the long boom of the 20s, the economic boom of the 20s, seemed endless. But there were some definite things in the works right around the time when he was elected and beforehand that spelled doom for our nation's economy. The day in which it happens is October the 29th, 1929, a day which is referred to as Black Tuesday. Now, when it comes to production and America's ability to produce, America was a colossus of the earth, like capable of producing a lot. And that production that was stimulated by those new inventions that we talked about, like the automobile, radio, movie, all kinds of new industries, kept our economy rolling along at a dizzying speed throughout the 20s, and it kind of led us into a false sense of permanent prosperity. Obviously, that was false. And few people sensed that it might end. But all of that is just imagine like a big bubble, and as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it ultimately bursts. And prices on the stock market continued to spiral upward and upward and upward throughout the 20s, and it created a fool's paradise of profit. Today, you invest in the stock market, it's not guaranteed. But in the 20s, it was with rich profits to be made in most industries, it was a safe bet you were going to make money. That shouldn't be how the stock market works. But this catastrophic crash came in October of 1929, and there's several triggers for it. So that is the crash of the stock market is just one reason for the Great Depression to happen. So the stock market crashed due to the over speculation. People investing money into things that are not creditable, things that don't have value, and that money just evaporates instantly with the crash of the stock market.
Did America do this to ourselves?
It could have been avoided, for sure. But at the time, it would have been unheard of for us to avoid it because of the nature of all the Republican presidents. They were pro-business, and they wanted business to make the profits. It would have been unheard of, really. So I don't want to say it was inevitable, but it would have been very difficult to overcome this. So the stock market crashes. We talked about that high tariff that was put under the Hawley-Smoot tariff, which raised taxes on imported goods, which put an additional burden on foreign countries. We've talked about like our nation's monetary policy, and the government's role in that, hands off. The unequal distribution of wealth. This is like where you have, which is not too dissimilar to today. You got people have more money than they could ever spend, and then living right beside them, there's people digging in a dumpster for something to eat. Very much an unequal distribution of wealth. So even working class people going to a factory and producing something, and they're not getting paid enough to even purchase the thing that they're making. So that's an unequal distribution of wealth. And then we talked about overproduction. That's a basic economic fact. If you have too much of something, what happens to its value? It decreases. Too much of anything. I think I've used the ink pen analogy with you guys before when it comes to economics. All right? Like, okay, pop quiz. And I collect everybody's ink pens. And I say, okay, this is the only ink pen in here. And the quiz is all you have to do is write down your name, and you get 10,000 points. So if you pass the pop quiz, you pass the class. If you fail the pop quiz, see you next year. How much is this pen worth? A lot, because there's not a lot of them. It's scarce, okay, and it's in demand. But if I were to say, okay, pop quiz, write your name on a piece of paper. How much? Anybody need to buy a pen? No, because everybody's got one, so it's not very valuable. So imagine when it's kind of how America was with everything. They overproduced everything, and they were not paying people enough to be able to purchase the products, and so people weren't making a living wage, which increased the overproduction, and they were doing this in two different industries. One is manufacturing, and the other is agriculture. Too much food. Can you believe that? We had too much food. Too much agricultural products. So all of these things contributed to the beginning of the Great Depression. And on October 29th, 1929, that is the official start of it, when the stock market crashes and like $40 billion in paper money just vanishes in an instant. And it was a horrible day for a lot of people, particularly on Wall Street in New York. A sick joke amongst the people who owned hotels in New York in the days following that, whenever people would check in, they'd say, for sleeping or for jumping. Because so many people were checking into like fancy hotels and then just jumping out of the window to kill themselves because they lost everything, which is horrible and sad and scary. So the stock market collapse really begins and heralds in a business depression.
So like the poor people, it didn't affect them.
It did because all the businesses go under and the businesses employ people. And by the end of 1930, the unemployment in the United States reached like 4 million people, which was very high, and that's not as high as it gets. That number actually triples by the time President Roosevelt becomes president. So not only were there fewer jobs to be had, if you were lucky enough to keep your job, your salary or wage was often slashed, maybe even in half. But people were willing to accept that to have a job. Right? We're talking like 50% unemployment, half of America no job. That's not good. That's really not good. Compound that with over 5,000 banks collapsing and folding up within the first 3 years of the Great Depression. Why is that bad?
Everyone's safe.
Yeah, it's not like today. If a bank collapses, your money's safe. When those banks collapsed, everybody's money went with them. Just disappears, just gone. The life savings of tens of thousands of ordinary citizens vanishes. So countless thousands of honest, hard-working people lost their homes, their farms to foreclosure. So now, especially if you lost your farm, you have no way to make money. You have no way to produce anything to sell. You're starving. So you begin to see things like bread lines and soup kitchens that would dispense food to hungry people begin to form. Men, in particularly, were psychologically bothered by this due to their inability to be the traditional breadwinner. Men that were willing and able to work but unable to find work. That's pretty psychologically detrimental. Blaming themselves. Also difficult on mothers. The size of families shrunk during the Great Depression as an inability to feed their children. Mothers even found themselves malnourished because they chose to breastfeed their children longer because of the lack of food. So you see these healthy, plump, fat babies and mothers that look like, starvation victims. So, it's almost like the Great Depression was caused by, we had too much. A plague of plenty. I've heard that expression before. A plague of plenty. We had outrun our capacity. We could make anything, and we could make a lot of it. But we had outrun our capacity to buy the stuff, and so it just piles up, and that causes an overproduction, and that causes prices to plummet. Too much money was going into too few hands. All right, so a lot of reasons for this. So it's a rugged time, and a lot of rugged individuals emerge out of this. So who do we turn to in times of great crisis? The president. And President Hoover was not exactly the best man for the job. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. I'm not saying that he's immoral. I'm not saying that he's corrupt. But he was not what the nation needed in 1929, 1930, and 1931, and 1932. He was perplexed by the horrors that had come to his country. And the idea that, he's a Republican and he's conservative, so how does he feel about the government being involved in the lives of people? Hands off, especially in business. So Herbert Hoover, because of the nature of his beliefs, he was convinced that hard work and being frugal and being reliant upon yourself were the virtues that made America great, and therefore he was not going to dole out anything, any kind of money or any kind of individual assistance to people, because he felt like it would destroy the national moral fiber of our country. If you're handed something, I'm sure your parents have all had this conversation with you. If you work for something and then you earn it, you're more likely to feel better about it, take care of it. Whereas if somebody just gives it to you, you're not going to take care of it. You don't really care. He didn't want to give anything out. He wasn't going to give Americans money or give Americans assistance. He wanted Americans to pull themselves up and earn it on their own. But as the Depression nightmare steadily worsened, local governments weren't even able to help either. And Hoover was, like people were still struggling, like horrifically struggling. So President Hoover he comes up with this trickle-down philosophy where he's going to try to trickle down money at the top, and hopefully it makes it down to the lower classes of society. Help the businesses, and hopefully that will help the lower rungs of society. So he finally comes up with an idea to run through Congress to spend an enormous amount of government money on a public works project. What's a public works project? You guys know what they are when you see them. You just didn't know what they were called. It's where the government builds something. That's all it is. Could be a road, could be a bridge, could be anything. Could be Mount Rushmore, whatever. That's a public works project. And Hoover asks Congress to push through a bill to spend $2.25 billion for public works projects. Now, initially, Herbert Hoover saw these bills, in particularly this one bill called the Muscle-Shoals Bill, as socialistic, as the government is hiring people to do work and government's doling out the jobs and doing things of that nature. He saw it as socialistic. But ultimately, the government passes the Muscle-Shoals Bill and does things to, build dams and bring electricity to places. Now, of Herbert Hoover's initial plan, the most imposing of that money that was going to be spent was going to be the Hoover Dam on Colorado River. First it was called the Cooley Dam, but they changed the name to it because it was Hoover's brainchild. Hoover Dam began in 1930, wasn't finished until 1936. Anybody ever been there? It's it dams up the Colorado River and the Grand Canyon. And it makes a big lake, and it's enormous, and it generates a lot of electricity through hydroelectric power. Right? But Hoover sternly, when it came to these other bills, aside from his initial idea, like the Muscle-Shoals Bill, he fought any scheme that he regarded as socialistic, like the Muscle-Shoals Bill. Now, the Muscle-Shoals Bill did not do the Hoover Dam. Okay, that was more for the South. The Muscle-Shoals Bill designed the dam, the Tennessee River, which was ultimately embraced by President Roosevelt's administration whenever he becomes president, and he creates the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA. Why do you think Hoover saw this as socialistic? What do these dams do? What does the Hoover Dam produce a lot of? Electricity. So who owns that electricity? Once the dam is built, who owns the electricity? This is what makes it socialistic in his mind. The government. And the government can take that electricity and sell it to the people. That's why he doesn't believe in that. Hoover's a conservative. Who does he think should own that electricity? A business. Let business sell things. He doesn't think the government should get involved in selling stuff. Okay? That's why he saw it as socialistic. So that seems odd in our mind because all of our public utilities are just that. They're public. Okay, they're regulated heavily by our government. Okay? So Hoover always vetoed any measure that he saw as socialistic because he didn't think the government should be involved in selling electricity and competing with private citizens who own electric companies. He doesn't like that idea. So that's kind of a mishandling. He does get the Hoover Dam built, so that's okay. That's good. Created a lot of jobs, people going to work. Took 6 years to build. That's 6 years of employment for a lot of people right there. Was it enough? Not even close. Not even close to being enough. So there's also he faces another huge crisis at the end of his administration, which ultimately has grand effects in him losing the next election, which he probably would have lost anyways. But this was like the nail in the coffin of his political life. And it has to do with veterans. Remember yesterday we talked about veterans? What happened in veterans in 1921? They made some advancements. What was it? That's right. The Veterans Bureau was created because the American Legion formed to put pressure on the government so that they could be given a bonus. Remember the bonus? That was to be paid in 20 years. So that law, the bonus bill, was passed in 1924. So when was the bonus due to be paid to the veterans? 1944, okay? But in the 30s, there's some rough times, man, especially the early 30s. And thousands of impoverished veterans, both who were in poverty because of the war and who were in poverty because of unemployment, they want their bonus now. They're not waiting anymore. They want it now. Okay? So these people were just living, lost their homes, lost their farms. So they just get whatever they can build, and they just live in like public parks. And they call these things Hoovervilles. This is an example of a Hooverville. It's just a shanty town. It's just a shanty town with like poor Americans living in it. People who have lost their homes. So they'll just go to like, Central Park in New York, Hooverville. There's poor people living there in boxes. A lot of them are veterans. These veterans have an organization where they can meet and collectively decide things. That organization is called the American Legion. And these legionnaires decided that it was time for them to get their bonus. And so several thousand veterans marched to Washington, D.C., and just set up a Hooverville in front of the Capitol. Bring their families. Where else are they going to go? They have nothing. They have no job. They have no prospect of a job. And this bonus army, as they became known as, or the bonus expeditionary force, because like in World War I, they were the American Expeditionary Force. These guys are called the bonus expeditionary force, or the bonus army. Mustered about 20,000 souls, 20,000 people living in boxes in front of the Capitol. And they're doing this in the summertime of 1932, an election year. When is the election day? What month? November. This is like the months leading up to the election. But in the summer of 1932, these veterans and their families promptly set up a camp on the vacant lots around Washington, creating a gigantic Hooverville. Imagine 20,000 people living outside with no bathrooms, no running water, in summertime. What could possibly go wrong, right? Unsanitary, disease-filled, horrendous conditions. Why are they there? What's their goal? What do they want? Why are they called the bonus army? They want their bonus now. So, you're Herbert Hoover. You have 20,000 veterans. What does it mean to be a veteran? You were in the war, and you've been trained to kill people. Right? That's what a soldier does, right? Let's get real. Soldiers, that's what they're trained to do. You have 20,000 trained killers standing outside your house, and they want their money. What would you do if you were Herbert Hoover? I'd think about giving it to him, right? Is he going to give it to him? He does. Why doesn't he give it to him? We're not giving you anything because that would hurt your moral fiber. Be a proud American. Go work and earn it for yourself. That's what he thinks it means to be an American. Pull yourself up, and remember kind of that gospel of wealth idea, Andrew Carnegie.
They already showed their encouragement and stuff like
Yeah.
that. We're already Americans too.
Correct. So, needless to say, when Hoover rejects them, he does offer to be like, "Hey, I'll pay your bus fare home." He offers to pay their bus fare home. And about 6,000 of the 20,000 take him up on it. So now there's only 14,000 trained killers in Washington. And the rest refuse to leave, even though they were ordered to do so. So, rioting breaks out in Washington, D.C. So when these riots break out, Herbert Hoover calls in the military, the real military, Not former soldiers, soldiers. And Herbert Hoover makes claims that this riffraff of veterans are led by communists. And he sends General Douglas MacArthur to get rid of them using tear gas and bayonets. Who's he using tear gas and bayonets on? Veterans. Homeless veterans. People who have fought for our country. Many of them have died. Many of them are disabled. Oh, and their women and their children. An 11-month-old baby dies to exposure from tear gas. This is a very brutal episode. Very brutal episode. Who's running against Herbert Hoover for president? Franklin Roosevelt. Herbert, he takes full advantage of this. Herbert Hoover sends the army. You know what Franklin Roosevelt sends? His wife with trays of sandwiches. You hungry? You want a sandwich? We would help you. We'd pay your bonus. I could have ran for president and won against Herbert Hoover. After this, are you kidding me? He killed a baby. Right? Literally. He didn't go strangle it, but he gave the order to use tear gas on a population of veterans and their families. So, a very brutal episode brought down additional abuse on a once popular Herbert Hoover. And the great engineer, as he was nicknamed, because that's what his job, he was a mining engineer. It was a pretty easy campaign slogan against him. The great engineer has ditched, drained, and damned our country. Ditched, drained, and damned our, damned has two meanings. So, the Democratic Party, along with Franklin Roosevelt, cash in on this and on Herbert Hoover's calamities. Here's General MacArthur. And you see the tear gas behind him. And then on the right, you see the future First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, meeting with the veterans, talking to them, while sandwiches are being handed out to their family. Okay, so enter the election of 1932. Who won? Was it close? Oh my gosh. All right, now this is 1932. Do you guys remember the 1928 one I showed you? That's 1928. Do you think some radical changes have come to America? Just a little bit. Look, I want you to imagine West Virginia is changing parties in a short period of time. And not only West Virginia, but everyone else. That's pretty bad. This is bad, okay? Now, I'm not saying the election of Franklin Roosevelt's bad, but this is evidence that things are going wrong in America, and people want change, okay? So, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we don't really know that he's a man up to the task. He never walks. He cannot walk. He is disabled. He was stricken with infantile paralysis from polio. He cannot walk. He cannot walk. So you think, anytime you see him standing, it's because he has these metal rods that are locked into place and he's holding on to somebody. He can't walk at all. His entire adult life, basically. So if you hear accounts of people talking about President Roosevelt rising to greet them, it doesn't happen. He can't rise. All right, he cannot use his legs at all. Okay, he had polio. Imagine electing a president who is in a wheelchair today.
Isn't that why his wife was like so a part of his
I think his wife was so a part of it because she was a part, like she was an excellent first lady, and she wanted to be, and she was capable. And she needed to be. He needed her. He needed her. All right, so Eleanor was America's most active first lady up to that point ever. So President Roosevelt wins the election of 1932, and he's got a plan, okay? And his plan, he kind of steals from his cousin who offered Americans a square deal. FDR offers Americans a New Deal, which contained the 3 R's. Relief, recovery, and reform. You guys ever heard Roosevelt's voice? It's vibrant. It's live. It's a great voice, very presidential. And on March the 4th of 1933, when he is inaugurated as President of the United States, his inauguration is nationally broadcast on the radio. And he does it from a bulletproof stand, and he provided Americans with inspirational hope. Hope, something that they had not had in a long time. In his inaugural address, he denounces the money changers who had brought calamity on our government and our people. And the note that resonates from that speech is his quote, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself," which is baloney. There's a lot more to fear than that, Frank. How about starvation? How about I have no job? How about I'm losing my house? But he's not going to come out and scare everybody to death. He's going to give hope. And that's exactly what America needed. Okay? So today, presidents are measured by their first 100 days in office. That started with Franklin Roosevelt because he had to hit the ground running, no pun intended. He moved decisively. Now that he had full responsibility for the United States government, he moves boldly. One of the first things he does is he declares a nationwide banking holiday from March the 6th to March the 10th. What does that mean? He just tells every bank in the United States, close your doors. Don't open. We're gonna do some inspecting of our banks. Why would he do that? Why would he tell the banks to close for an inspection? Is it because, the banks don't know how to operate? I mean, why would he do that? Well, what has been happening to banks since the Great Depression began? Collapsing and closing. Who puts their money in the bank? Who's losing their money in these banks that are collapsing? American people, citizens. Why do you think these banks keep collapsing? Like one bank collapses and then another one will collapse, even though there's nothing really wrong with the bank. Why do you think that is? What does the bank need in order to operate? You guys know how banks work? They need money. They need people's money. What are people doing during these early days and for 4 years during the Great Depression? They're taking their money out of the banks and they're putting it under their mattresses, which is not good for our economy. This is how banks work. I go to the bank and I say, okay, bank, I want to open an account, a checking account, savings account, whatever. And I say, here's $10,000. And they say, thank you for your $10,000. We're going to give you an account. And they take that $10,000, and then Jana comes in and she says, hey, bank, I would like to buy a car. Can I have $10,000? And they say, sure. Here's $10,000 that I just gave them. And then Jana's going to pay them back, and by the time she pays back that $10,000, she will have paid them back $13,000. So she bought $10,000 from the bank for $3,000. Money is a good just like anything else. It can be bought and sold. It has value. All right? The value of money is called interest. When money's cheap, you have low interest. When money's expensive, it's high interest. Okay? So just think as like a bank is like a grocery store that only sells one product, money. Okay? And you want to get the best deal you can if you're a consumer. However, there's no product during this time because nobody's putting their money in the bank. They have no money to loan. All right? And because money is scarce, what does that mean to the value of it? It's expensive. It's very expensive. So they need to lower the interest rates. And they can do that by increasing the flow of money. All right. So when Franklin Roosevelt tells all the banks to close down for an inspection, he also tells people, it has become increasingly unfashionable for you to be storing your money under your mattresses and in mason jars in your backyard. Why don't you get that money, and after this bank holiday and we inspect it, you go put it in your local bank? And you know what people did when he said that? They did it. They actually listened to it. Can you imagine listening to a president? I don't think Americans would do it anymore. Any president. But they did it. They listened to him. And they put their money in the banks. And it helped. A little bit. It helped a little bit. But it's a step in the right direction. It's a step in the right direction. Also, within his first 100 days, in an effort to build the public's confidence in the government and the banks, he establishes what's called the Federal Depositors Insurance Corporation. Have you ever listened to a bank commercial on the radio or seen one on TV? And at the end of it, they say, member, FDIC. Ever heard that? A bank that is a member of the FDIC gets insurance protection from the federal government. So, what it means is, initially when the FDIC was created, if you put $5,000 in the bank and that bank collapsed, the federal government would give you $5,000 back, insurance. Now, if you had $20,000 in the bank and the bank collapsed, they give you $5,000. Okay, is up to a limit. Today, the FDIC still exists, and I think they insure deposits up to $250,000. It's pretty good, pretty good. So, what is the purpose of the FDIC? To increase confidence in the banking industry. Wouldn't it? What is the risk involved if the bank collapses for an investor or for a person who has their money in the bank up to $5,000? What risk is there? There's none. You're going to get your money safe. Another thing that increases confidence in the banking industry. All right. Another thing that Roosevelt gets pushed through during his first 100 days is called the SEC, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates the stock market and prevents dishonest trading practices and punishes those who engage in it, like Martha Stewart. She engaged in insider trading. That is a dishonest trading practice. Okay? All of these things, this is just a teeny tiny snippet of the programs that FDR pushed through in his first 100 days. It is a veritable alphabet soup of all the letters of all the organizations he tries to create. The CCC, the Beer and Wine Act. He repeals prohibition, or pushes for the repeal of prohibition. the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. The TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, electrifies the South. We kind of take electricity for granted. Even in the 1930s, people in cities took electricity for granted. But if you lived in a rural area in the South, you did not know electricity, okay, or indoor plumbing. You still had the outhouse, all right? So when the TVA came through the South and they were damming up the Tennessee River and using that electricity to electrify the South, they come to your home and they wire it, all right? It was not uncommon for these Southern, they didn't have any light bulbs, to plug, screw in the socket. They were afraid, they would take potatoes and they would stick them over the empty light sockets because they were afraid the juice was going to run out. You ever heard the electricity referred to as juice? The juice is on or juice is out, got no juice. So they'd put potatoes and they'd stick them into light sockets because they didn't want the juice to drip down on them. That's a real story, okay? So, but that's what the TVA does, electrifies the South. Glass-Steagall Act, all kinds of programs dedicated to either recovery, relief, or reform. Recovery, relief, or reform. Recovery would be the things like the bank holiday. We're going to recover from these bank closures. Relief would be things like the TVA. We're going to bring you electricity, we're going to give jobs. And then reform, you're going to see things like the FDIC. We're going to change the way we do our banking practices in order to increase confidence in our government. And it sounds like FDR's got an easy job, right? Very difficult, because not only is he trying to bring our nation out of the worst economic crises that we had ever seen, he also is faced with one of the worst meteorological crises, natural disasters in American history, with the Dust Bowl. All right, so ever since the post-World War I boom days after 1918, farmers had suffered from low prices due to overproduction. Low prices due to overproduction, especially in products like grain. So despite the depression, conditions became desperately worse as an innumerable amount of mortgages were foreclosed on and homes were lost. So FDR, in an attempt to help the farming industry, he creates the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. Now, this is what the AAA is going to do. So what is it that's keeping the price of food down for farmers? What keeps the prices low for farmers, like of grain in particular? What makes prices low? A surplus. There's too much of it. So what FDR and the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, tells farmers to do is to plant less. Plant less. If you have a 100-acre farm, plant 60 of it. And to offset the cost of you not planting, we're going to pay you not to plant. So the government would give a subsidy or just give money to farmers to not plant. This was a pretty controversial thing initially, and it got off to a wobbly start. As, there was warehouses and warehouses and warehouses and warehouses loaded with agricultural products, cotton, grain, flour, wheat, you name it, animals even. And so when farmers are told that they have a harvest getting ready to come, to go out there and just plow it up and let it rot, or there's a surplus of pork, go slaughter 40% of your pigs, just slaughter them. That's pretty controversial. Several million pigs were purchased and slaughtered. Most of the meat was given away to people who needed the relief, soup kitchens. But some of it was just used for fertilizer. You just take dead pig and throw it out there, let it rot. It's pretty controversial, isn't it? So a lot of people saw this as a sinful use, destruction of food, at a time when thousands of people were going hungry. But what happens to the balance of the overproduction, the surplus of these products? It slowly balances out, okay? And just when things start to balance out, nature has a mind of its own. Nature seems to look at the AAA and say, you need some scarcity? I got your scarcity. And it provides some unplanned scarcity late in 1933 as a prolonged drought struck the states of the Trans-Mississippi Great Plains area. The Dust Bowl. A massive drought. This massive drought is just weeks without rain, followed by furious wind, which would whip, like, all this land had been plowed and plowed and plowed and plowed and plowed and plowed and plowed. And when it is exposed to a lack of moisture, it turns to like baby powder. There's no baby powder. The consistency of it, you go, what does it do? It just floats everywhere, right? That's what it turned into dust. The soil turned to dust, literal dust. And when this wind picked up, it would literally black the sky, turn the sky black, block out the sun. And millions of tons of powdery topsoil from homesteads and farms that stretched from Colorado to Missouri literally flew away. It literally flew away. This era, this event is known as the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl. You want to talk about psychological terror, is you're living on a farm, which you're about to lose, and then a black blizzard comes, and you can't see anything. You're in your home, and dust is just accumulate, like this much dust covers everything in your home because it gets in, and then it goes away, and then it comes. You don't know, and it happens over and over. Okay, like you get everything cleaned up, then all of a sudden it happens again, or you find yourself outside, and you risk suffocation. There was an account of a 7-year-old boy in Kansas who died from suffocation because he was outside during one of the black blizzards. Couldn't breathe. The dust overcame him. So this is horrendous. This is a horrendous thing in American history, the Dust Bowl. And it's brought on not only by the drought, but by the farming techniques that the dry farming techniques and mechanization that was brought to the Great Plains of America, which led to this powdery topsoil. So tens of thousands of people, after a dust storm happens, they go out and they look at their land, and what's left? What is it that's getting blown away? The topsoil. What's left? Clay. What are you going to grow in that? Nothing. The topsoil goes away. You know where it went? The Atlantic Ocean, West Virginia, New York. There's accounts of people living where we do of it raining dirt. because it would take this dust high up in the atmosphere, and then it would fall as far east as the Atlantic Ocean. Their farms are literally floating away and becoming worthless. Can't grow anything.
Is it hurting, like, when it blows away and you said it's like raining mud? Is it hurting the people?
No. No one was affected physically by the raining of the dust here, as it so dissipated, like highly dissipated. But in about 5 years in this area, people from Oklahoma, people from Arkansas, Okies and Arkies, that's what they're called, Okies and Arkies, trekked to Southern California. And you see another boom in California's population. The dismal story of these human tumbleweeds, just kind of being blown about on the wind, is portrayed in a book. It's a best-selling novel by John Steinbeck called, anybody know what it is? The Grapes of Wrath. It's kind of like the Uncle Tom's Cabin of the Dust Bowl. Kind of portrays an American family and their hardships and follows them. Ultimately, though, they still have hope as they're trekking out toward California. But pretty horrendous event in American history, the Dust Bowl. All right. All right, by far the greatest, most expensive, and longest lasting program to come from President Roosevelt's New Deal: Social Security. Literally, that's what it is. Security for our society. What is Social Security? It began as a New Deal program. What is it?
What identifies you, basically?
Okay, your Social Security card is an identification card for Americans. It is, no doubt. What does the Social Security Act do? Social Security Act of 1935. It's a New Deal program.
Does it ensure like certain citizens, like
Which citizens?
veterans?
Is it like with disabled people?
Old people and disabled people. It is, that is a very much oversimplification, because the Social Security Act is one of the most complicated and far-reaching laws to ever pass Congress. But it is designed to cushion future depressions. Because what this law does is it provides for unemployment insurance to people who lose their jobs. It also provides security for elderly people. What happens when you get old? You get sick. When you get sick, you can't work. So, it provided for some specific categories of retired workers to receive regular payments from the federal government, usually every month. These payments would range depending upon how much money you earned. And it was going to be paid for from the wages of both employers and employees. So people that are working are going to pay for it, and businesses are going to pay for it too. This provision also made for the blind, the physically handicapped, delinquent children, and other dependents to receive benefits as well. This was not an easily passed piece of legislation. Who opposed it bitterly? Which party? Republicans bitterly opposed it. In particularly, former President Herbert Hoover says America must be built on a cult of work, not a cult of leisure. And they charged that every worker would have to wear a metal dog tag for the rest of their life and called it a communism It's the go-to, any kind of government program. But Social Security still exists for now and has brought a measure of security to older people as well as disabled people in America ever since 1935. Okay, so we have about a minute left, and we will pick up tomorrow with the beginnings of World War II.